They didn't watch me to understand. They watched me to catch me. I wasn't studied, I was stalked. Not with weapons, but with whispers. Not with chains, but with questions soaked in judgment. Every step I took, every breath I dared to exhale, measured, picked apart, mocked behind sealed lips and plastic smiles. They said they were concerned. What they meant was curious. Curious to see when I'd break. Curious to see if the mask would slip. Curious to see if the rumors were true. They weren't checking on me. They were checking the scoreboard, waiting for me to lose. 5 years, 1,825 days, of silence mistaken for submission, of calm mistaken for weakness, of discipline mistaken for guilt. They didn't study me because they admired me. They studied me because they feared what they didn't understand. They feared that I could be quiet and still win, feared that I could bleed and still rise, feared that someone like me, someone they wrote off, could outlast every single trap they set, and they set plenty. You think I didn't notice? The questions that weren't really questions, the smiles that melted when I turned my back, the way they hovered, not to help, but to record the fall. It was never support, it was surveillance. Every laugh, dissected. Every mistake, archived. Every moment of humanity, put under the microscope like a crime scene. Because deep down, they weren't waiting for a breakthrough. They were waiting for a breakdown. I was the one they swore would crack. Too quiet, too still, too different. They thought I had something to hide, and maybe I did. Maybe I was hiding the truth, that I saw right through them from the start. That I knew this world doesn't love a clean soul unless it's dirty enough to entertain them. But I didn't entertain, I endured. They watched me like a lab rat, expecting me to self-destruct, praying I'd give them a show, praying I'd give them a reason to say, "See, we told you." But I gave them nothing, no meltdown, no scandal, no spiral. I gave them consistency. I gave them control. I gave them silence so loud it haunted them. Because nothing drives a bitter heart more insane than someone they can't figure out, someone they can't bait, someone they can't break. They watched and waited and watched some more, but the cracks never came. Because what they didn't know is that I've lived through storms that made their words sound like lullabies. I don't fall for pressure. I forge in it. And while they stood over me with their clipboards and theories, I was building a legacy too pure for their hands to touch. They weren't watching to learn. They were watching to laugh, to label, to limit me. But here I am, still standing, still silent, still whole. They've spent 5 years staring at me through glass, searching for filth. But the only dirt they ever found was in their own reflection. They circled me like vultures, waiting, watching, thirsting for the moment I'd crack. They didn't want to know me. They wanted to catch me. They weren't searching for truth. They were starving for scandal. I could see it in their eyes. They didn't ask questions. They made assumptions. They whispered in corners, wrote their fiction, and waited for the day their lies could wear my name. But I fed them nothing, not a sound, not a slip, not a single piece of the destruction they begged me to become. They needed me to fall, so they could justify the way they treated me, so they could say, "See, I knew it." But they never got their proof, because I buried my pain in discipline. I turned my rage into routine. I didn't scream. I sharpened. I didn't fight back. With fists, I fought back with silence, and it drove them insane. You have no idea how much it hurt. To sit still while they tried to light a fire under me. To hold my tongue while they dragged my name through the dirt they threw themselves. But I knew what they were doing. They were baiting me, desperate for a headline, hungry for a meltdown. They wanted a spectacle. I gave them stone. They called me cold. I called it calculated. They said I was hiding something. I said, maybe it's peace, because silence isn't weakness, it's control. And control terrifies people who've never had it. They needed me to lose it, to snap, to prove them right. But I was too focused on winning. Every insult, I swallowed it like poison and used it to build immunity. Every rumor, I let it echo, until they choked on the silence of my indifference. They waited for me to break. But I don't bend for cowards. I don't bow for clowns. Let them laugh. Let them guess. Let them choke on the nothing I gave them. I stayed silent not because I was afraid, but because I knew noise is what they wanted. And I don't perform for parasites. I watched them twist stories I never told, mock moments I never gave. They built a character from shadows and cursed me when the light never exposed what they expected. They needed drama. I gave them dust. They needed outrage. I gave them stillness. They needed flames. I gave them frost, and in that frost, I froze their games. Their weapons dulled. Their laughter turned to confusion. Their audience gone, because the longer I said nothing, the louder their desperation became. And now they sit in silence too, not because they chose it, but because they finally understood. You can't starve someone who learned how to fast. You can't trap someone who never took the bait. And you can't cancel someone who never performed for you to begin with. So here's to the silence, the stillness, the strength of saying nothing while the world begged for your collapse. I fed them silence, and they died waiting for scandal. They poked, they probed, they prayed I was fake. Because real scared them, because consistent shook them, because quiet strength confused them. They needed a flaw, any flaw, a slip-up, a mask, a secret to rip open, something, anything to prove I wasn't what I claimed, to prove I wasn't who I kept showing up as. They tested my silence with chaos. They baited my peace with provocation. They poked the cage, hoping the beast inside would lash out so they could point and say, "See, told you." But I didn't bite. I didn't scream. I didn't swing back. I stood still, and that scared them more than rage ever could. They wanted theatrics. I gave them truth. They wanted a villain they could frame, but I refused to act in their script. They couldn't handle someone who didn't crack, someone who didn't fold, someone who walked through hellfire and didn't come out begging to be like. So they started inventing shadows. They couldn't find dirt, so they painted it. They couldn't find a scandal, so they whispered one into existence. They called it confidence when I smiled, arrogance when I stayed silent, suspicion when I kept my distance. Every move I made was dissected. Every breath analyzed under a microscope. They sharpened with envy. They weren't seeking truth. They were searching for an excuse to erase me, because my existence made them uncomfortable. My calm made them restless. My consistency broke their patterns. They prayed I was fake, because if I was real, then everything they told themselves about people like me was a lie. If I was real, then it meant they could have chosen character over clout, discipline over drama, grace over gossip. But they didn't. So they needed me to fall. They needed me to prove their bitterness was justified, that no one could possibly walk through this world clean. But I didn't come here to play saint. I didn't come here to perform for their redemption. I came to stand unapologetically, unmoved, unashamed, because what they don't understand, they fear, and what they fear, they attack, and what they can't break, they label fake, too good, suspicious, strategic, calculated, arrogant. Let them keep guessing. Let them keep diagnosing. Let them keep whispering in rooms that echo with insecurity. Because the deeper they dig, the more they expose their own reflections. They didn't uncover my secrets. They revealed their sickness. They didn't expose my flaws. They magnified their fear of someone who refused to be corrupted. And while they poked, I built. While they probed, I prayed. While they plotted, I prepared. Now I don't need to defend who I am. They've already testified with their obsession. Their paranoia was my proof. Their disbelief was my documentation. I lived rent-free in the minds, of those who couldn't afford to see someone rise without permission. They poked, they probed, they prayed I was fake. But what they found was a soul they couldn't stain, a light they couldn't dim, a truth too rooted to be shaken. And now they pray louder because I'm still standing, still silent, still solid. And that silence, that's the sound of everything they feared becoming real. 5 years, they waited for me to fall, to snap, to give them the mess they needed to feel superior. They expected me to lash out, to crack, to finally show the weakness they swore was hiding underneath my calm. But nothing came, no tantrums, no scandals, no confessions. Just me, still here, still solid, still silent. You see, I didn't play the game, I refused. They tried to bait me with gossip, they tossed hooks, made of lies, they dangled traps dressed up as concern. But I never bit, I never flinched. They called it arrogance, I call it armor. They wanted dirt, I gave them discipline. They wanted to see me unravel, but I stitched myself tighter with every attempt, every lie, every glance, every silence in the room. When I walked in, I sewed it into my spine. And now, they say I'm cold, untouchable, emotionless. No, I'm just untamed. 5 years, no blood, no blemish, no burnout. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just done explaining my light to people addicted to darkness, done trying to convince the wolves I wasn't food. So I stopped speaking, started building, stacked every insult into a throne they could never reach. They thought I stayed clean because I wasn't challenged, but I stayed clean because I was. I've walked through storms barefoot. I've smiled through betrayal. I've eaten dinner while surrounded by doubt and knives. They don't understand. Being clean doesn't mean I never bled. It means I never let the blood stain my soul. I didn't win because I had less pain. I won because I refused to let pain own me. Let that sink in. They wanted chaos. I gave them stillness. They wanted anger. I gave them presence. They wanted to see me rage. I gave them peace so loud it haunted their sleep. Because here's the truth. There's nothing more terrifying than someone who stayed silent and won anyway. Let them wonder how I kept my composure. Let them whisper about the way I carried myself. Let them invent stories about what they don't understand. Because the truth would crush them. I wasn't protected by privilege. I was protected by purpose. I wasn't favored by people. I was favored by providence. That I stayed clean because I never let the world scrub away who I was. Not even when it tried. Not even when it hurt. Not even when silence felt like suffocation. 5 years, 5 quiet years, and they still couldn't stain me. They tried everything, rumors, resistance, rejection. But all it did was polish me. All it did was sharpen me. All it did was prove one thing. I am not built like them, and I never will be. So let them stew. Let them rewind every moment, trying to find a crack. There's nothing to find, because while they were watching me, I was watching higher. Eyes on something bigger, heart in something sacred, spirit locked in something they can't access. And that's why I'm still here, unmoved, unbothered, untouched. Because 5 years taught me how to hold fire without ever letting it burn me. So no blood, no blemish, no burnout. Just me, unchanged, unbent, unbreakable. They're still watching, but the game has changed. Back then, they stared through glass, hoping I'd crack, hoping I'd shatter under pressure. They studied me like I was a creature, like I was some experiment, like I didn't bleed the way they do. They wanted to prove I was no different, that I'd fold like the rest, that my purity was just packaging, that my strength was performance. So they poked, prodded, plotted. They dressed it up as concern. But I saw the hunger in their eyes. They weren't hoping I'd grow. They were hoping I'd fail, loudly, publicly. For 5 years, they circled my name like vultures, waiting for the fall, waiting for the fire, but all they found was peace, stillness, a soul they couldn't stain. They kept watching, waiting, assuming I was faking it, assuming my silence was strategy, not survival, not wisdom, not restraint. But here's the twist. I was surviving. I was bleeding. I just didn't hand them the spectacle. I bled behind closed doors. I healed behind curtains. I found God in the quiet, and He made sure I left no fingerprints where they planted their traps. So now they still stare, but I'm not in the cage anymore. I outgrew their microscope. I outlived their analysis. I outclassed their attempts. They built that glass box with their projections, but I broke it with purpose, and when the shards hit the floor, I didn't run. I walked, head high, heart clean. And they couldn't handle that. They can't figure out how I never snapped, how I never spiraled, how I stayed graceful when I had every reason not to. Because what they don't understand, they fear. And what they fear, they stare at. So let them look. Let them wonder. Let them write essays about my silence. Let them screenshot my life like it's a scandal waiting to erupt. But here's the truth they won't say out loud. I'm not entertainment. I'm not evidence. I'm evolution. I didn't just survive the cage. I made it irrelevant. I moved so quietly, they forgot to lock the door. And by the time they realized, I was already gone, already glowing, already graced. Now they stare from a distance, like tourists to a temple. They don't know how I got here, but they know they're not welcome, because this new level isn't for the curious, it's for the called. It's for the ones who walked through hell and stayed holy. It's for the ones who carried peace through the storm and never dropped it. So stare, scroll, speculate, but you'll never touch what you refuse to understand. You'll never access what you tried to destroy. Because I didn't just leave the cage, I sealed it shut, and I threw away the key with hands that never dirtied. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm just gone. Gone from the cage. Gone from the microscope. Gone from the lies. And now I stare back, but not with rage, not with revenge, with silence, with stillness, with that untouchable kind of peace that makes your enemies whisper, "He must have had help." I did. From God, from purpose, from patience. So keep staring. But remember, I'm no longer in the cage. I own the sky.